Professor Heenan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What was the significance, do you think, of the crowds today? What was the mood? Tell us something about what it looked like.
Well, I was there today and yesterday. I live in Derry, and the mood was one of somber reflection. People thinking about those 14 people who went out on a civil rights march to demand justice and equality, better housing, better jobs, and those 14 people did not come home. So there was a real dignity today, a real sense of this will not be forgotten. And of course, Bloody Sunday has cast a very long shadow on the city of Derry. It's scarred, is still there. You can feel what happened on Bloody Sunday around every corner in the city. There are murals, there are memorials, but also alongside that somber reflection was also a deep recognition for the Bloody Sunday families and how they fought the state, how they spoke truth to power, how they refused to give up. And sometimes it's easy to forget that they were blamed, they were slurred, they were called all sorts of things. They were told that it was their fault in the same way Grenfell Tower victims were told that it was their fault, Hillsborough victims were told that it was their fault, but they refused to give up. And at the heart of their campaign was also a quest for reconciliation. So they refused to be taken over by any political group, any paramilitary group. They just wanted truth and justice for their families. And I think they have become a beacon across the world for other people who are fighting injustice.
I remember very well the Widgery inquiry, the first inquiry, and it did indeed conclude that the soldiers were innocent and that the protesters were somehow guilty or had brought it on themselves. That has largely dissipated, though looking at social media today, not entirely dissipated. What about the demand for accountability? Now that Savile and David Cameron have entirely, without qualification, accepted the guilt of the armed forces on the day, the innocence of the dead on the day, what about the demand that people should face trial while they still can?
Well, as you rightly say, it's the issue about truth and justice. So it is important to remember that, yes, Bloody Sunday was 50 years ago, but actually it was only 12 years ago that David Cameron made that apology where he said what happened on Bloody Sunday was unjustified and unjustifiable. Indeed, he's been speaking this week saying that when he read the Savile report, he was deeply shocked by what he read, and he wanted to make sure that his apology left no room for doubt, no room for shade. So I think those people who refuse to accept it will never accept it. And that is really an issue for them, because if they cannot accept that the state went out and murdered 14 innocent civilians, then really that's an issue for them. And they need to examine their conscience. But as you rightly say, there is the issue then that so the Savile inquiry got to the truth. But what about justice? And I suppose that takes us then to the present day and the current British government's proposals around legacy. Those proposals would mean that no one would have access to justice, that all these inquiries and investigations would be closed down. And that is extraordinarily difficult for families across Northern Ireland to face. So uniquely, all political parties in Northern Ireland are against what is currently being proposed by the British government, because they feel that to have a glimmer of hope, people should feel that as a citizen of a state, they have the right to seek justice. It was agreed in the Stormont House Agreement that there would be an historical inquiries unit, that there would be an oral history and archive. And remember also that some families want truth. And that's what they wanted. They wanted to find out what happened to their loved ones. They wanted to know how they died. They wanted to know if they were alone. Other people are more interested in justice. So we can't treat the families as one group. and I mean all families, all victims of violence. But really, these proposals are essentially the British government saying, now you must draw a line in the sand, you must forget about it. And I suppose in Northern Ireland, the feeling is really, could that possibly be said to people in Manchester? Could it possibly be said to people in Birmingham? Or is it really another sign that Northern Ireland is truly a place apart and we are told that there is no justice for people here?
Now, cards on the table, I have all my life supported United Ireland. I watched what happened 50 years ago. I was already a political activist. I believed that it would change everything forever and would, however long it took, begin to herald the reunification of the country. It's 50 years now. I don't suppose when I was 17, I thought it would be 50 years. Has it changed politics in Northern Ireland forever?
Well, I think it was a turning point in the Troubles. It was definitely one of the darkest days of the Troubles. And certainly historians would say that it meant that the violence was escalated. We don't know what would have happened had we not, had Bloody Sunday not have happened. Edward Heath certainly thought that we were staring into the abyss. So yes, it changed things. And speaking to people throughout the city, throughout Northern Ireland, they were very fearful because how could they say to their children, you must respect law and order, you must respect the state, and try and explain this to them? So it was very, very difficult for people living here who did not want us to tip into civil war. And I think today is a reminder again about how fragile peace is in Northern Ireland, how volatile the situation in Northern Ireland still is, and how important it is that the British government are not reckless with our peace process. Peace here was very hard won, it's highly valued, and it is hugely important that the co-guarantors of the Belfast Agreement take their responsibilities very seriously.
Of course, there will be an early opportunity to test political opinion if the Stormont elections go ahead, will they?
Oh, they will go ahead. I think we're already on an election footing, so the parties are already beginning to set out their stall, as it were. The difficulty, I suppose, really in all of this is the difficulty for the DUP and the protocol. Since September, they've threatened to collapse our devolved institutions. They're now threatening to collapse them on a weekly basis. They have withdrawn from the North-South Ministerial Council, which is part of the Good Friday Agreement. And they're also now saying that they will not institute the checks at the ports. So they are ramping up the tension, trying to escalate tension, and having this threat hanging over Northern Ireland that our institutions are going to collapse. It is important to say that alongside that, we have by far the worst hospital waiting lists in the UK. Our health service is in crisis. Our education system is in crisis. So there's real anger that there's a threat to bring down our elected institutions and cause further instability at a time when we feel what we really need is some sense of certainty.
Has Jeffrey Donaldson made any difference at all? I knew him well. Always had some admiration for his political skills, at least. Has he turned anything round for the DUP?
Not at all. I think it's very clear again this week that the DUP is a deeply divided party. So this is a party that when we thought about it, we talked very much about how there was always a united front, that they never washed their dirty linen in public. The party is deeply divided, and Jeffrey has been unable to stamp his imprimatur on that party, even though he's been the leader for 6 months. So we have MPs doing their own things. We have different policy positions coming from within the party. As I say, this constant threat to collapse the devolved institutions. And really, the DUP have painted themselves into a corner over the Northern Ireland Protocol because they are consistently saying it must be scrapped, it must be binned, the protocol has to go, it's intolerable, it has really affected our constitutional position. But the reality is they have not put forward a single alternative. So were the government to trigger Article 16, which I really think they thought they would, What would be the alternative? I mean, Article 16 being triggered does not mean the protocol disappears. It means we go into further negotiations, further uncertainty. So it's this kind of constant threat, but with no solutions, no ability to say, well, what would we like instead? Or how can we ensure that we move forward with stability? Because this region desperately needs foreign direct investment. We, of course, are in the post-COVID period. There are serious issues around employment, and no employer is going to come here and say, well, I don't know if there's going to be a government in 6 months' time, because it is deeply unstable.
Do you share the view that Sinn Féin will be the biggest party?
It looks likely, and actually for Sinn Féin, they don't really have to do anything other than stand on the sidelines and watch the DUP implode, watch them making these threats. The reality is there is a joint committee. There were issues with the protocol. There were issues that needed to be addressed in terms of mitigations, and that is the job of the joint committee. And already we have seen some changes with the protocol. So I think for Sinn Féin, they simply think, well, we don't have to say anything. Why would we? We just need to sit back and let this happen.
Professor Heenan, thank you very much for joining us on this auspicious day.